So using a substitution method to solve the system, it's pretty easy, pretty basic to do. Let's take a look at, let's go number 5 here, or not. Let's do number 1. Now, step 1 on substitution method is to pick an equation and solve for a variable. So which equation would you like to pick, the top one or the bottom one? Okay, now in math, there's many roads to the same place, right? Many roads to the same place. So for example, let's say you did pick the bottom. Let's see, don't write this down, right? Just watch me do this. I want to pick the bottom one. And let's say, do I want to get x by itself or y by itself?
X.
Okay, let's get x by itself. So that would mean that I would have to, let me zoom in more here. I would have to subtract 3y and subtract 3y. And then I would have 2x. Don't write this down, right? Don't write this down. Just watch me. I would get 2x equals negative 3y minus 20. That means I would have to divide by 2 to get x by itself. Divide by 2, divide by 2. And you would have x equals negative 3 halves y minus 10. And this would be your isolated equation with x by itself. So that would barely be step 1. Does that make sense? Now, that is really, really, really ugly because I would now have to substitute this value into the equation I have not used, which would be the top equation, and I would have to substitute in place of x. So what I would have now is y equals 6x, but instead of x, I want to put the binomial, which is negative 3 halves y minus 10. Are you with me? Now this is ridiculous, right? Don't do this. Just watch me. Because I'd have to distribute 6 times that, and I would get y equals negative 18 over 2 with the y, and then 6 times negative 10, that would be a negative 60. And then I would be able to do negative 18 divided by 2, that's negative 9. So I would have y equals negative 9, y minus 60, and then I would have to solve for y. So I want to get y's to one side. I want to go plus 9y and plus 9y to be able to do, or to get 10y on the left side. 10y equals negative 60, which means that y equals negative 6. Now you have one answer. How would you find the other answer? Plugging it back in. So if I did plug in the negative 6 for y, right here's negative 6, we got an answer negative 6, and plug it in right here for y, that would be negative 6 equals 6x, which means if I were to divide by 6 on both sides, what would I get as a final answer for x? Negative 1. So if I divided by 6, I would get negative 1. So my x value is negative 1. X equals negative 1, and my y value is negative 6. That's a lot of work, right? That's a lot of work, right? Okay, so let me jot down my answer right here on the side, just so we don't forget it. Negative 1, comma, negative 6. Cool? Now, that was the long road. That was the scenic route. If you're not in a rush, you could do that. If you're bored on a Saturday night, go for it. But check this out. Come on guys, let me go back and delete this. So like I said, I've deleted it. Let me go back, and when I think of the first step, now I already have my answer up here, but when I think of the first step, pick an equation and get a letter by itself. We picked the bottom one and we got x by itself. Why not pick the top one? Because it already has a letter by itself. Does that make sense? So this is the quick route. You always want to go for the quickest path to your answer. So let's pick the top equation, and it already has y by itself. So you're going to take the 6x and you're going to substitute it into the equation you have not used, and you're going to substitute it into x or y? Y. Why? Because y is 6x. So here's y. You're going to plug in a 6x right there. So when I plug in 6x, I want to have the same exact equation, 2x plus 3y. So let me write it out. 2x plus 3y, but instead of y, I'm plugging in the 6x. Make sense? Equals negative 20. And of course, when we work this out, 3 times 6x, that's 18x. So we're going to have 2x plus 18x equals negative 20. And when you add 2x and 18x, that's 20x, which equals negative 20, which means that when you divide by 20, x equals negative 1. Piece of cake, huh? A lot easier. So if you take a couple of seconds and just, when you select your first equation, pick the equation that already has a variable by itself. And now if you want to find the other one, you go ahead and plug in your negative 1 for x right up here. So if I did plug in a negative 1 right there, it's going to say y equals 6 times negative 1. So what is y equal to? Y equals 6 times negative 1. What's y equal to? Y equals negative 6. So you found your x, you found your y, and that was a heck of a lot easier. I mean, look, the answer's still up here from the previous work that we did. It's still the same answer, negative 1 for x and negative 6 for y. It's just a lot easier to do. Does that make sense? So I'm not asking you to do number 2, but for step 1, which one do you pick, the top one or the bottom one? The top one. Why? Because it already has x by itself. How about for number 5, which one would you pick, the top one or the bottom one? The top one, because it already has y by itself. How about for number 8, which one would you pick? Anyone, but you know what? I think it would be smarter to go with the top one, because if you wanted to get a letter by itself, which one would you pick, x or y? X, because if you add to y, you move it over and you get x by itself. So you always got to analyze what your first step is going to be. How about number 6? Would you pick the top one or the bottom one? Bottom one. You guys get the idea? Yeah. Pretty easy, right? Now, the notes that I asked you to write down, were these guys right here, the special cases. Now, if you're solving a system with substitution and you end up with something impossible, like 3 equals 5, then you say no solution. What that means visually, it means that your lines are going to end up parallel and they're not going to cross. But we're not doing graphs right now. We're just stating whether there's a solution or no solution or an infinitely many solutions. So if you're solving and you end up with something that's impossible, like 3 equals 5, you're going to say no, as in no solution. When you're graphing, when you're solving and you end up with something that's always true, like 7 equals 7, that means that you have an infinite amount of solutions, infinitely many solutions. What that would mean graphically is if you graphed one line and then you graph the other line, it would be the same exact line, which means that they have an infinite amount of points in common. But let's take this to the worksheet that we're doing, and let's all do number 5. So which one would you pick, the top or the bottom equation? Top, because it already has y by itself. It's ready to rock. So you're going to substitute the binomial 2x plus 6 into the other equation. And we're going to plug it into the y. Because y is this, and we're plugging it in for y. So the key is to rewrite this guy. So let's rewrite it right here, right next to it. It's going to be 2x minus y, but instead of y, notice I put parentheses, equals 2. So there's the exact equation that you have right here. But instead of y, we're putting the 2x plus 6 in there, in parentheses. So I'm going 2x plus 6 right in there. Okay, so I want to work this out. I want to focus in on this, and I want to work it out. That minus sign gets distributed. That's a minus 2x. The minus sign goes to the 6. It becomes a minus 6. We still bring down the equals and the 2, and we also bring down the 2x that's in front. Are you with me? And now we need to combine like terms, and check this out. 2x, take away 2x, what happens? It disappears. What is left? There's a negative 6 equals 2. Negative 6 equals 2. That's impossible. What do you say? You say no. No solution. No. You could also do the symbol, the 0 with the slash through it. Does that make sense? Yes. Now, right here, it's a no solution system. There is no solution to the system. If I were to ask you to classify it, that means that there is no point of intersection, which means that they're parallel, which means that they're inconsistent if I were to ask you to classify it. Does that make sense? Okay, let's take a look at number 8 here. Number 8, which one would you pick, top or bottom? Top's a good one to pick, especially if you decide to get what letter by itself? X. So we're going to get rid of the minus 2y by going plus 2y and plus 2y. And what I want to do is I want to rewrite my top equation. So my top equation is going to be x equals 2y plus 3, because 3 plus 2y is simply 2y plus 3. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that top equation is right there. It's just looking a little differently. I have x by itself now. Once I have x by itself, I'm going to substitute the binomial, the 2y plus 3. I'm going to plug it into the other equation into x or y? X, right there. Why? Because this is a x equals. It says x equals 2y plus 3. So in place of x, we're going to put a 2y plus 3. So once again, the key to doing this correctly is to rewrite your equation, but with parentheses in place of the letter that you're going to be plugging into. So I'm going to rewrite it. It's going to be 4, instead of x, I put parentheses, minus 8y equals 12. Are you with me? And inside the parentheses, what am I plugging in? 2y plus 3. And now it's just a question of solving. So when I distribute 4 times 2y, that's 8y. 4 times 3, that's 12. And let me bring down the rest. The minus 8y comes down. The equal sign comes down. The 12 comes down. And now let's continue solving this blue equation. I want to combine like terms. When I combine the 8y with the minus 8y, what happens? Cancels out. Now, what is left is a 12 equals 12. Is that true? Yes. When is 12 equal to 12? Always. So what does that really mean about this system? That there's infinitely many solutions. Okay? So be ready for this on tomorrow's quiz. On tomorrow's quiz, we're also going to have solving systems by graphing. That's easy. Just graph it. If they don't cross, no solution. If they do cross, then you just find the point of intersection and that'll be your answer. So it's only over 2 sections. It's going to be pretty quick. So I hope you guys study these videos and complete your homework to be prepared for tomorrow's quiz.